This city in Ohio, this statue of George Washington, this Oscar-winning movie. What do they all have in common? Well, if you guess that they were all at least partly inspired by a man who lived and died over 2,500 years ago named Lucius Quinctius Cincinnatus, well, you'd be right. If you click the subscribe button down below, one of my assistants will be in touch shortly to get you your prize. In any case, Lucius Quinctius Cincinnatus, better known as Cincinnatus, has been an inspiration to those familiar with Roman history for a long time. He was a Roman statesman who lived around 500 BC, which was also around when ancient Rome transitioned from being a kingdom to a republic. Republics were much less common back in those days. Importantly, it would be a long time before Rome became the political and geographic titan that remains world famous to this day. Indeed, at that time, Rome found itself threatened by its neighbors, and the senators called upon Cincinnatus and gave him complete control of the city so that he could efficiently and quickly organize its defense. Again, this was shortly after the city had just recently done away with the office of a supreme leader, a king. However, to the surprise of many, Cincinnatus not only successfully defended the city from its nearby threat, but immediately relinquished his emergency powers and returned to his simple life as a farmer afterwards. Or at least that's how the story goes. Regardless of whether the winds of history have buffed out some of the rough edges, the fact that this story is so popular for thousands of years raises the question why it resonates so deeply. Indeed, the former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, compared himself directly to Cincinnatus in his resignation
On the
speech.
subject of bouncing around in future careers, let me say that I am now like one of those booster rockets that has fulfilled its function, and I will now be gently re-entering the atmosphere and splashing down invisibly in some remote and obscure corner of the Pacific. And like Cincinnatus, I am returning to my plough, and I will be offering this government nothing but the most fervent support.
Which also quickly prompted a negative critique from the Times Radio. Further, as of the making of this video, in the legacy section of Cincinnatus' Wikipedia article, you'll find the former President of the United States, Joe Biden, directly compared to Cincinnatus, with not one or even two, but 5 articles cited as reference, making it the most heavily cited part of the entire page. Of course, it's immediately followed up with 3 citations, pointing to his later comments where he stated he was forced out of the presidential race by his party. All of this is to say that Cincinnatus remains a very important, if not controversial figure both in politics and cultural discussions. Again, this raises the large question: what is going on here? Why is the story of Cincinnatus so deeply compelling? What does it reveal about the human imagination? Why does it resonate so deeply? Well, to really get to the bottom of those questions and give a satisfying answer, I think we need to first take a step back and answer these 2 questions. First, what are temperance, humility, and magnanimity? And second, what do they have to do with each other? Okay, so let's start with temperance. For any past viewers who have seen my other videos, you might already have an idea of what it is, but for everyone else, temperance is one of the 4 cardinal virtues, or key perfected abilities, that helps us live our lives well. In particular, temperance guides our ability to rationally react to and guide our personal desires. As the 20th century German philosopher Josef Pieper puts it, prudence looks to all existent reality, justice to the fellow man, the man of fortitude relinquishes in self-forgetfulness his own possessions in his life, but temperancia is distinguished from the other cardinal virtues by the fact that it refers exclusively to the active man himself. Okay, so temperance is about reason guiding our personal desires so that we can live a good life and not be dominated by our thoughts or feelings. But in order to be rational about our personal life choices, we have to be grounded in knowledge. In other words, we have to know the facts. Otherwise, how can we tell which desires are real and meaningful and which are deceptive and misguided? Maybe like those extra pairs of pants you bought during COVID. In particular, and critically, this includes self-knowledge. To act well, we need to know ourselves. Interestingly, for Josef Pieper, another name for true self-knowledge is humility. Humility is grasping who we are truly and living that out on a daily basis. Now, Pieper is very careful to distinguish true humility from false humility, explaining that it is not constant self-accusation of disparagement of one's being and doing, of cringing inferiority feelings. Indeed, in practice, while we often give ourselves more credit than is due outwardly, we often give ourselves less credit than is due inwardly, when no one is looking. Interestingly, for Pieper, humility is ultimately rooted in understanding our place in the world. As he writes, humility too is not primarily an attitude in human relationships. Humility, consequently, is not outward behavior, but an inner attitude, born of decision of the will. Regarding God in its own creaturely quality, it is an attitude of perfect recognition of that which, by reason of God's will, really is. Above all, it is candid acceptance of this one thing, that man and humanity are neither God nor like God. Put another way, humility is completely opposed to the infamous vice of pride. Interestingly, for Pieper, pride is ultimately rooted in a theological question about the relationship between God and man. As he writes, pride is the anti-realistic denial of the relationship between creature and creator. pride denies the creaturely nature of man. Every sin contains two elements, a turning away from God and a turning toward a transitory good. The decisive and defining element is the first one, the turning away from God, and this is more pronounced in pride than in any other sin. Okay, so temperance is critical for living our lives well, and it rests in true self-knowledge or humility. So what does this all have to do with Cincinnatus? Well, the key here is that for Pieper and thinkers like him, true humility is actually perfectly paired with another critical virtue that is almost completely forgotten today, namely the virtue of magnanimity. Magnanimity, besides being a word that takes some practice to say, is the virtue of striving for greatness. True magnanimity is when we seek honor, but only when appropriate and in a worthy manner. This means we're not overly sensitive to dishonor and not concerned with empty flattery. Rather, this is a natural striving for greatness in a moderate and rational manner. Indeed, Pieper says that the mark of magnanimity is frankness, which comes from the peace of a perfectly fearless heart. In other words, Pieper is arguing that true temperance, which is when we order our personal desires rationally, includes both humility, which recognizes our limitations, and magnanimity, which recognizes our capacity for greatness. If finding that balance sounds contradictory and almost impossible, well, I don't think you're alone. In fact, I think that's why the story of Cincinnatus is so powerful, echoing throughout history for over 2,000 years. Cincinnatus was ready and able to rise to greatness when his city called upon him, but also truly humble enough to step down and retire to his life as a farmer when the danger was overcome. In other words, he was a striking model of the virtue of temperance, especially in terms of living out the seemingly contradictory pair of the virtues of humility and magnanimity. Or at least that's the best explanation I can come up with. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Until next time, friends.